The car rolled in like a slow, deliberate breath. The window lowered halfway, and in that thin gap came a voice so familiar it nearly stopped Jack's heart. "Jack," Tu Tien whispered. Strained, trapped, alive. His body surged forward on instinct, the folder shaking in his hands, and he tasted metal. Fear had a flavor. Far behind, Officer Thu lifted one flat palm. Don't. In that frozen second, Jack understood the trap. Love was the lock, and he was the key they wanted to turn. If you believe a mother's safety is sacred, tap like and stay with me. This story is for every woman who has held a family together with trembling hands. But to understand how Jack reached that bus shelter, we have to go back to the first message. Earlier that afternoon, the house was quiet in the way a home gets quiet when one person is missing from its center. Jack stood at the table where Tu Tien had left the paint tray. One brush, one folded cloth, one fresh strip of paint on the gate. Healing had looked so simple an hour ago. Then his phone lit up. Not a call. A message. "Bring the file. Come alone." Jack stared at the dead screen as if it had stolen his air. The words didn't sound angry. They sounded professional, cold, clean, confident. Fear jumped so hard he tasted metal. Officer Thu took the phone from his shaking hand. "Unknown number," she said. "Likely a burner. We'll log it." Jack's eyes were wide and raw. "They have her," he whispered. Mom Loy stepped in front of him, close enough to interrupt the pictures in his head. Her voice trembled, but she didn't. "Jack," she said softly. "Look at me." He blinked, like he was coming up from water. "I need you standing," Mom Loy whispered. "For Anna, for Min, for Tu Tien." Jack tried to breathe and failed halfway. "I left," he said, fast and brutal. 40 minutes. "I left her." Officer Thu's tone tightened. "That's fear talking," she said. "We don't decide from fear." Jack shook his head. "If I don't go." "If you go alone," Officer Thu cut in. "They control the whole story." The gate creaked. Mr. Dung and Uncle Ba stepped in, faces calm on purpose. Mr. Dung heard one sentence and understood the rest. "They want the file," he said quietly. "Not Jack." Jack swallowed. "They want to erase evidence." "Chekun and isolate you," Mr. Dung replied. "The fastest way to break a protector is to make him choose between love and logic." That was when Anna appeared, clutching a crumpled paper like a shield. On it, in careful child letters, "Daylight, leave, return, safe." Her eyes were red. Min hovered beside her, 3 years old, watching Jack's face. "Daddy," Anna whispered. "Bring Mommy back." Jack dropped to his knees, smoothing the paper with shaking hands. "I will," he promised. "I will." Then he stood, pain turning into determination. "Tell me where," he demanded, looking at Officer Thu. "I'll go." Mom Loy caught his sleeve, grip fierce. "Not alone," she whispered. "Don't let fear turn you into exactly what they want." "But they said that because it benefits them," Officer Thu answered. "We control what we can control." Mr. Dung stepped to the folder on the table, the thick file of statements, photos, timestamps, the kind of truth that makes dirty men desperate. "We make 2 files," he said. "One real, one for their hands." Jack's eyes flicked. "A decoy." "Paper meets paper," Mr. Dung said. "But truth stays protected." Jack's voice went hoarse. "If they hurt her because I tricked them..." Mom Loy's eyes filled. "They already hurt her by taking her," she whispered. "You don't hand darkness your light." Auntie Lan arrived like a quiet blessing and gathered Anna and Min without questions. "Come," she murmured. "We keep little hearts inside." Anna clung to Jack's hand for one last second. "Say the bridge," she begged. Jack forced the words out like planks over water. "I leave," he rasped. "I return. Safe." Anna nodded and let Auntie Lan pull her away. In the kitchen, Mom Loy pressed a warm cup into Jack's hands. "Drink," she said. "Your body must stay yours." Jack stared at the cup like he didn't deserve it. Mom Loy's voice dropped. "I failed her once," she confessed. "I won't fail her now by letting you collapse." Jack drank. His hands still shook, but the shaking became motion, not paralysis. Mr. Dung copied quickly. Officer Thu slid the real envelope inside her jacket, close to her heart. "The decoy looks real," she said, "but it can't destroy our case." Outside, the winter light leaned toward the late afternoon. The fresh strip of paint on the gate looked too clean. Guilt tried to poison Jack. "If you hadn't asked her to paint, if you hadn't left..." "I'm in aftershock," he whispered, using Tu Tien's words for himself. Officer Thu nodded once. "Good," she said. "Name it. Then move." The phone rang. Unknown number. Officer Thu lifted her hand. "Speaker." Jack answered, borrowing steadiness from everyone around him. "Hello?" A low voice, amused. "You have the file?" "Yes," Jack said. "Where?" A pause. Just long enough to feel like someone smiling in the dark. "Old bus shelter by the fields. 10 minutes. Alone." Jack's stomach dropped. His voice stayed level. "I'll be there." "Bring only the file," the voice added. "No police." "Okay," Jack said, and the call ended. Officer Thu moved first. "Plain clothes. Distance," she said. "He must believe he wrote the rules." Mr. Dung nodded. "Uncle Ba stays at the house. Neighbors watch the gate." Mom Loy looped a scarf around Jack's neck with trembling hands. "You come back," she whispered. "Even if your heart is breaking, you come back." Jack nodded once. Hard. The bus shelter waited by the fields. Small, lonely, too ordinary for a nightmare. Jack stepped under its roof and held the folder in both hands like an offering he hated. His phone buzzed. "Open the file. Show it." He cracked it open just enough to flash paper. A car appeared at the bend, slow and controlled. It rolled to a stop in front of him. The window slid down halfway, and from inside the darkness, a woman's voice, thin, strained, unmistakable, whispered just loud enough to split him. "Jack." His body lurched forward on instinct. Far behind, Officer Thu's hand rose. "Don't." Jack froze, shaking, eyes locked on that dark window, trying to breathe, trying to see her, trying not to let love become the key that opens the wrong door. Because this time, the darkness wasn't knocking. It was offering him the one thing he wanted most, and daring him to lose himself to get it. Folks, my heart is pounding. Before we see the rescue, please hit subscribe. Jack's feet wanted to run. His heart wanted to throw itself through that half-open window and drag Tu Tien out with bare hands and broken rules. But Officer Thu's raised palm held him in place. "Don't." Jack forced his face into stillness. "Tu Tien," he said, low and steady. "Are you hurt?" Her whisper came thin. "I'm here." A man's voice cut in, smooth, amused. file. Give it. Jack lifted the folder. I brought it. You let her out first. A short laugh. You don't make terms. Then you don't get what you want, Jack said, and surprised himself with how calm it sounded. For a second, even the fields went quiet. Then Tu Tien breathed, Jack, daylight. Their code. Daylight meant breathe, think. Don't sprint into darkness with your eyes closed. Jack nodded once, tiny, only for her. Daylight, he echoed. I'm right here. The window lowered a fraction. Jack saw her cheek, pale, the shadow at her jaw, her hands held low like they'd been tied. Her eyes met his, and he felt it, the way she was trying to protect him even now. Throw it in, the man snapped. Jack set the folder on the shelter bench. You want it, he said. Come take it. A door creaked. A boot hit dirt. The man stepped out, cap low, confidence on his shoulders. He moved toward the bench, eyes hungry on the folder. Jack lifted both hands, palms open. He stepped back one pace, enough to feed the man's courage, not enough to leave her. Tu Tien, Jack said, louder, like a test. Tell me something only we know. The man hissed. Shut up. But Tu Tien's whisper slipped through anyway. The gate, the new mark. Jack's throat burned. One strip, one promise. Her eyes shone. I leave, she breathed. I return, she forced out. She couldn't say the last word. Someone beside her shifted, listening. But Jack heard it anyway. Safe. The man reached for the folder, and Officer Thu's voice sliced across the air. Police! Don't move! Everything cracked open. The man spun. The driver jerked the car forward, Tu Tien's body jolting with it. Jack's lungs forgot how to work. Tu Tien! Her face snapped to the window, eyes wild. Don't! She cried. Jack, don't! The car tried to surge past and stopped, hard, trapped by bodies and metal where Officer Thu had placed them. Jack didn't watch the arrests. He couldn't. He ran to the passenger door and yanked, locked. He pressed his hand to the glass. I'm here, he said, voice breaking. I'm here. Tu Tien lifted her hands, white zip ties, tight, cruel. Jack's fingers shook so hard he couldn't obey himself. Officer Thu was beside him. Move, she ordered. And Jack moved because her authority kept his love from becoming a mistake. The lock popped. Jack knelt. Not like a hero. Like a husband who had been dying quietly for hours. He touched Tu Tien's wrists. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Tu Tien flinched at the first touch. Not from him, but from memory. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead into his shoulder. The sound she made wasn't words. It was finally letting go. Officer Thu cut the ties. Can you stand? Tu Tien nodded, and her knees buckled. Jack caught her. I've got you, he breathed. I've got you now. Tu Tien's lips trembled. I didn't want them to use me. You are not a weapon, Jack said, fierce and quiet. You are my family. He kept an arm around her waist, anchoring her. Breathe with me. Tu Tien tried. The breath came ragged. It feels borrowed. Take it back, Jack whispered. One at a time. Officer Thu didn't celebrate. She simply checked the folder on the bench, then looked at Jack. It was a decoy, she said. The real file is safe. They can't erase what they did. Tu Tien's eyes fluttered shut like someone setting down a weight. They kept saying, "Bring the proof and we'll give you back," she whispered. Like I was a package. Jack's throat tightened. "I was gone 40 minutes, he said, shame spilling out. "I left you." Tu Tien opened her eyes and fixed them on his. Tired, brave, unblaming. "Don't drown there," she breathed. "Come back to me. Daylight, remember?" At the gate, the fresh strip of paint stared at them. Bright, innocent, too clean for what had happened. The door opened. Anna flew out first, paper clutched in her fist. Min ran after her, wide-eyed. "Mommy!" Anna screamed. Tu Tien dropped to her knees and caught her so tightly, the child squeaked. Min wrapped his arms around Tu Tien's side, pressing his cheek to her like he could glue her back into the house. Tu Tien rocked with them, shaking. "I'm here," she kept whispering. "I'm here." Mom Loy stood in the doorway with both hands over her mouth, trying to stay strong and failing. Tu Tien lifted her face. "Mom." And Mom Loy broke. Quietly, completely. She cupped Tu Tien's cheeks and kissed her forehead. "I'm here now," she whispered. "I'm here." Tu Tien nodded, tears sliding. "I know." Jack hovered one step back, watching the women hold each other, watching the children cling, watching the house reclaim its center. Then Anna looked up at him, eyes shining. She held out her crumpled paper. "Daddy," she said, fierce in her small chest. "Say it." Jack knelt beside them. He placed his palm over the paper like a vow. "I leave," he said. "I return," Tu Tien whispered with him, voice steadier now, braided with his. "Safe," Anna finished. And the word landed in the room like a candle lit after a storm. Later, Jack stood at the gate with Tu Tien. The brush was still there. The paint tray still smelled like hope. He dipped the brush and painted one more narrow line beside the first, not to pretend darkness didn't come, but to prove it didn't get to keep the door. Tu Tien leaned her head on his shoulder. "Daylight," she murmured. Jack kissed her hair, eyes wet. "Daylight," he answered. "And we keep choosing it." Inside, Anna's paper lay on the table. Simple words for complicated lives. Daylight. Leave. Return. Safe.